and Northern Ireland, where we could also see the odd rumble of thunder. Though with the lighter winds, still brisk down some eastern coasts, feeling more pleasant than it did on Saturday. So as we go through this evening, those showers will continue for a time, but becoming increasingly confined to northern areas, with clear spells developing elsewhere. And with those light winds, that could mean we see the odd patch of mist and fog for some southern and eastern areas. But temperatures will drop a little bit more readily again tonight, so more widely a chilly night, with temperatures in rural areas dropping into single figures. So a fresh, bright start to the new week. We will see a few showers developing again, mostly across the northern half of the UK. Plenty of brightness in the southwest at first, but clouds starting to move into the afternoon as we get the next low pressure system moving in, and once again feeling pleasant in the sunshine.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant Mercury, my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Settle in for a late morning maraud through world affairs and the arts and a high noon of culture and ethical debate. Starting this week with politics, Rishi Sunak seems to have zeroed in on his election strategy. He will establish clear blue water between the Tories and Labour on the issue of net zero. He has attacked what he calls anti-motorist policies, like the ultra-low emissions zones. And the government has offered new licences for oil and gas exploration offshore, to howls of anguish from Green campaigners. Can the Conservatives drill down to discover electoral advantage? In West Africa, a deadline approaches for the democratically elected president of Niger to be reinstated after being ousted in a military coup last week. The revolution fits a pattern repeated in several of the sub-Saharan or Sahel states and has Russian fingerprints all over it. This time, neighbouring countries sound prepared to intervene. A think tank expert will explain it all to me. As culture wars engulf all human activity, a new border might be opening up in gardening. The key fault line is over weeds. Should they be identified as disruptive interlopers or as indigenous British plants whose diversity should be celebrated? We speak to an RHS gold medal winner who seeks balance. Nicholas Kenyon will shortly join us in the studio. The former director of the BBC Proms and the Barbican Centre will opine that the Arts Council got it very wrong with its attempt to push the English National Opera out of London. And, of course, Stefan Kyriazis will be here, and he'll update us on the latest from the West End, including a unique chance to step into the life of Freddie Mercury. All of that to come. But first, with your latest news headlines, Polly Middlehurst.
Michael, thank you. Good morning to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom today is that the National Crime Agency is now teaming up with social media firms to crack down on social media posts by people smugglers who are encouraging asylum seekers to cross the English Channel. The Prime Minister says the new partnership between law enforcement agencies and tech giants will tackle attempts to lure migrants into paying to make the journey. Group discounts, free spaces for children and offers of false documents are all among the social media posts that Rishi Sunak wants removed to help achieve his promise to stop the boats. Minister for Immigration Robert Jenrick told GB News within the last half hour that deterrence is a crucial part of the government's plan to tackle the small boats crisis.
The overwhelming majority of those people coming on small boats are coming from France, from a safe country with a well-functioning asylum system. They're choosing to come to the UK, and that must be in part because of a perception that the UK is a softer touch. That's why we're changing accommodation. That's why we're making it harder to live and to work illegally in the UK. There's been a 50% rise in the number of raids this year by immigration enforcement to try and close down bogus employers who are breaking the law by employing illegal migrants.
Well, that's Robert Jenrick. Well, within the last half hour, the Shadow Immigration Minister, Stephen Kinnock, has said a Labour government would also house migrants in barges for short periods while tackling the backlog of asylum cases. Now, a Labour government would also continue to place those asylum seekers in former military bases for up to 6 months. Mr Kinnock blaming the Conservative government for the current asylum backlog. He couldn't say, though, how long it would take a Labour government to reduce the 172,000 cases currently outstanding. Now, those who've been wrongfully convicted of crimes will no longer have their living costs docked from their compensation payments. New guidance issued by the Justice Secretary Alex Chalk comes into immediate effect today. It follows the controversy sparked by the jailing of Andrew Mulkinson, who spent 17 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. He voiced his concerns that expenses may be deducted from his compensation payments, prompting Downing Street to make urgent amendments to the law. Now, Storm Anthony saw strong winds hit some parts of the UK yesterday, blocking 100 miles of railway between Exeter and Penzance in Cornwall. About half a month's rain fell in some areas, with a number of people evacuated from their homes in North Yorkshire due to flooding. Gusts of 78 miles an hour were measured at Berry Head in Devon, while 43 millimetres of rain fell in Scarborough in North Yorkshire. International news, and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is accusing Russia of bombing a blood transfusion centre in the northwest of the country. Mr Zelensky claims a number of people are dead and others are injured, but the president didn't disclose how many fatalities there were. He described the strike in the eastern area of Kharkiv as a war crime. So far, there's been no comment from Russia. And in Pakistan, the former Prime Minister Imran Khan's party is calling for peaceful protests after a court sentenced him to 3 years in prison for illegally selling state gifts. Several of his supporters were arrested by police during a protest yesterday. Mr Khan was convicted of misusing his 2018 to 2022 premiership to buy and sell items in state possession. He's always denied any wrongdoing. And finally, despite a bit of rain on the parade, Brighton's Pride celebrations carried on yesterday. Things did come to a bit of an abrupt halt last night, though, when the band on stage was left without sound. That band, the Black Eyed Peas, believe it or not, and they were forced to end their set early when the sound cut out, but it left fans to carry on with the singing. Yesterday's event hit by train cancellations as well as the wet and windy weather as that rain battered the UK, but those trains are back up and running now for day 2 of the event. But heavy rains have forced the cancellation of Newcastle's Loose Fest today and yesterday. That had been expected to attract around 60,000 people. You're with GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thank you very much, Polly. It's now 2 weeks since the Labour Party trounced the Conservatives in the Selby and Ainsty by-election and yet failed to oust the governing party in the outer London seat of Uxbridge. And while Sir Keir Starmer's side is still wrestling with the implications of that failure, Rishi Sunak is letting the public know that he's received the message. He's come out against what he calls anti-motorist policies like the ultra-low emissions zone. And he's given the go-ahead for more drilling for offshore oil and gas. It has raised the hackles of Greenpeace, who invaded the Prime Minister's Yorkshire home in protest. But how will it play out amongst the rest of the voting public? I'm joined by Michelle Chisholm, who's a care worker in Outer London and, as of recently, an anti-ULEZ campaigner, Alistair Donald from the Academy of Ideas, and Paul Richards, author and a former Labour Special Advisor. Michelle, what brought you into political activity? Because you're not a particularly political person, are you?
I'll be honest, Michael, I've never, ever voted, but I didn't actually realise I was getting into politics. My father is 76 years old. He's a builder. He's still working. He's been going on for the last probably 18 months about ULEZ and the cost. My mother is a part-time worker. She is also semi-retired and drives a diesel vehicle. Again, my father's been going on and on and on. So I started investigating and researching and discovered that it would cost both of those £12.50 per day to go to work. Now, they're at retirement age, they're older part of life, and for both of them, it's just not practical to be buying new vehicles. I then got involved in trying to find out where protests and things like that were happening and stumbled across a Facebook group called Action Against ULEZ Extension, which has 35,000 members and a sister group that has 45,000 members. I started reading and researching, and the horror stories that I'm reading from the public are just frightening. It's heartbreaking.
The horror stories like those you've already told us of people who are risking going out of business because of this charge.
There are so many companies going out of business, sole traders particularly, the elderly becoming prisoners at home. We have people that are quite frankly suicidal. People have been writing to the Mayor's office and have had replies telling them that they should contact Mind. And I just find it really frightening that the Mayor is not listening to the public. I'm grateful that finally Rishi Sunak has come out and said that he's not anti-motorist, but to be honest, it is day on attack on the motorist. And I just think that nobody's taking the people into consideration here. I really support our elderly and our vulnerable, our disabled. And it's just frightening that you get to the later part of your life and you're being told that basically you need to stay at home or pay £12.50 every day. And I find that really, really frightening. We're in a cost of living crisis. We have food banks in our boroughs. Electricity, gas is all going up. People can't afford to eat. Now, Sadiq Khan is offering to feed children every day free school dinners, but it's in one hand you're taking £12.50, and then in another hand you're feeding the children. Well, why not let the parents keep their own £12.50 and feed their own children?
Michelle, thank you very much. There's a danger here, of course, Alistair, of confusing topics, because ULEZ is basically about pollution and supposedly, protecting the health, particularly of children. But nonetheless, we are also now into this debate. May I just ask you to position you? On this programme, we talked to Ross Clark about his book, Not Zero, which basically predicts that net zero is going to be a catastrophe for this country and a great advantage to places like China. Does that summarise your position? Are you against net zero, at least in the timescale that the government wants to do it?
Yeah, I think I am. Net zero is already a disaster in some ways for this country, because even although it's projected into the future and the date of 2050 is the one that people talk about, the policies that are being implemented are much sooner than that. I mean, we're due to switch over to away from diesel and petrol in 2030, and there's other measures that are coming in even next year. So the consequences of these things have come forward and they're hitting us now, which is one of the reasons why the ULEZ in outer London has become such a bone of contention, because it's created a situation where it's not in the future, but it's very much now, and it's hitting people in the pocket, which I think is unusual. You almost think, what was Sadiq doing when he did this? Because it's quite clever the way that these policies have been introduced in the past, because often they've been at the level of subsidies. You hand out subsidies for insulation, or you hand out subsidies for solar panels or whatever. So it seems to be in some ways a benefit for people. But what the ULEZ situation has exposed is that not only is it not a benefit, but it actually targets normal working people and makes life more difficult for them.
Is it your assessment, first of all, that Rishi Sunak has changed his position, and secondly, that if he has, and if he changes it more, that it could be of electoral advantage? What's your assessment?
Well, I think he has changed his position to some extent. So he's looking at pushing some of these measures back, or potentially pushing some of them back. So that indicates to me that the consensus around this issue has been to some extent broken, because it was almost an unchallengeable assumption over the past few years that this must be done. I mean, even if you question it, you were called things like a climate denier. You're sort of delegitimized from even questioning this. So I think the political situation is interesting just now because it's placed on the political agenda. What my fear is, though, is that this will become a case of muddling through. It'll be a little bit of delay and a little bit of extra subsidy to sweeten the blow, but it won't actually challenge the bigger issue of net zero and its damaging consequences for the way that economies and the whole of society works. Because ultimately what net zero represents is an anti-development stance. And you can see that. I mean, if you look at the Times this morning, for example, there's an interesting report from Charlotte Evers on the way that this is hitting Wales, where roads are not going to be built because anything that creates more car use or faster speeds is to be banned. I mean, we need to create a society that works, that is more mobile and has the level of economic development that can benefit for people's working lives.
Paul, if Rishi were opening up clear blue water with Labour, would Labour be happy about that, or would it be nervous?
Well, Alok Sharma has said very recently, the Conservatives' green guru, that it's time to wake up and smell the coffee. His reading of the elections was that voters were coming to Labour and away from the Conservatives because the Conservatives were not doing enough on the green agenda. David Cameron, you'll recall, won an election, a majority, with a very green-tinged Conservative agenda. And it's a bit surreal to be sort of trying to row back from these things at a time when Europe is in flames and we've got strange weather patterns dominating our own country and people's holidays have been ruined because of the weather caused by man-made climate change. So, the question should be, how do we make this work? ULEZ is a good example, by the way, of a policy that needs to be finessed, because if it isn't working, you change it, but you don't drop it and just let the air quality get worse and worse and worse. Everyone has to come, people of good faith, together now and try and fix this problem.
What do you think the opinion research shows? If the Conservatives did look less keen on net zero than Labour, how do you think that would play out? I mean, I understand your own position and how you feel about it, but how do you think the numbers would actually look?
Well, I mean, that is Sunak's calculus, isn't it? And I assume that they've done a lot of research and I assume they've done some focus groups. But there is a role for leadership here. And what we know from public policy is that if leaders stand up and set a clear direction, they can take people with them. I was very involved in the smoking ban, which at the time people said, oh, you can't do this. There aren't enough police to arrest all the smokers in pubs. And public behaviour and attitude changed almost overnight. Nobody now wants to, very few people want to walk into a pub and it would be filled with smoke. The Conservatives' Clean Air Act in the 50s was resisted by business. They said this would be a restriction of trade, it would be bad for the economy. It was introduced by a foresighted Conservative government and the Clean Air Act meant that there was clean air in London. So all of these public policy issues have to be done in a way with some leadership, yes, taking people with them, but you don't drop them at the first sign of trouble. You have to get the job done.
Alistair, the points that Paul has made there, I mean, it strikes me, I'm sorry not to give you a chance to reply at the moment, Paul, it strikes me that, you know, changing the rules on drinking and driving and even smoke-free zones and so on did not involve people in enormous capital cost, which many of these net zero policies do. You know, if we're going to have to change our boilers and our cars and so on, is that an important difference? Or do you think Paul is right, that with leadership you can persuade people?
Well, I think it's right. This is what people are starting to realise, especially initially through the ULEZ in Outer London. But with all these swathes of measures that are coming up over the next 5-6 years, where we will be forced to change, where there's not really an appetite, all the or lots of the measures that are seem to be slowly coming on the horizon, things like heat pumps and different types of boilers and electric vehicles as well. There's not been the take-up for those options that the government imagines. So they're way behind implementing these things. And it's undoubtedly the case that part of that is because the costs of these things are enormous.
Alistair, we're just coming to the end, and I would just like to give Michelle one last word. I think you may have mentioned that you're not even someone who has a fixed voting pattern.
No.
Is your vote available for the person who gets it right on issues like ULEZ?
I honestly believe my big problem here is that whilst we try to speak to the government about ULEZ, the constant replies when people are emailing, contacting, is that the position sits with the Mayor of London. Now, the Mayor being a Labour Mayor, I think is putting an awful lot of people off of voting for Labour, to be perfectly frank. However, many people are saying that they don't trust Conservatives because they think that Conservatives are hiding behind the Mayor's policy and that the Conservatives actually do want the ULEZ. So, for me personally, I think that the Mayor of London should actually be impartial. We should have some, so because what happens here, the Mayor is basically either at war with mainstream government or is in agreement with mainstream government. If we had an impartial person, I think that would make things much easier. But just before we go, Michael, air pollution, can I say something?
That much, because we've got to go.
OK. Just for the record, it has been confirmed that one person has died from air pollution, not 4,000, as that keeps being cited. And I truly believe that the air pollution that we're being constantly drummed in, bad air pollution,
Overstated, you think?
Yeah, is scaremongering.
Thank you to all. Thank you to Michelle Chisholm, Alistair Donald and Paul Richards. After the break, Alex Vines from Chatham House will explain the toppling of the president of Niger and whether Russia was responsible.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to our latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So after an unsettled start to the weekend, things do look better for the second half of the weekend as Storm Anthony moves away to the east, putting us in this northwesterly airflow. So bringing us some showers today, but also plenty of sunny spells. For many, it will be a dry day. Those showers will be mostly focused down the central spine of the UK, heaviest across Scotland, Northern England and Northern Ireland, where we could also see the odd rumble of thunder. Though with the lighter winds, still brisk down some eastern coasts, feeling more pleasant than it did on Saturday. So as we go through this evening, those showers will continue for a time, but becoming increasingly confined to northern areas, with clear spells developing elsewhere. And with those light winds, that could mean we see the odd patch of mist and fog for some southern and eastern areas. But temperatures will drop a little bit more readily again tonight, so more widely a chilly night, with temperatures in rural areas dropping into single figures. So a fresh, bright start to the new week. We will see a few showers developing again, mostly across the northern half of the UK. Plenty of brightness in the southwest at first, but clouds starting to move into the afternoon as we get the next low pressure system moving in, and once again feeling pleasant in the sunshine.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It is deadline day for the military leaders of Niger, who face an ultimatum from neighbouring countries to reinstate the democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum, whom they ousted a week ago, or face the consequences. The military coup in the West African country was the third in that region in recent years. In the capital, Niamey, thousands of people gathered to support the action, many waving Russian flags. The Russian mercenary Wagner Group, which aborted its own coup attempt against Moscow just over a month ago, is active throughout Africa's Sahel region. To explain what's going on, I'm joined by Alex Vines, the director of the Africa programme at Chatham House. Welcome to GB News. Should we take seriously the threat from the neighbouring countries to intervene?
Yes, we should. The regional body, which is called ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, is very serious about that this is a line in the sand and that no more coups should occur. And so they've been planning for a military intervention that could be up to 50,000 troops, in fact, they're talking about. But the chiefs of defence staff of ECOWAS met on Friday and said, first of all, they want a comprehensive package, which means politics, diplomacy, and the threat of a military intervention. So diplomacy needs to go first, and we're still in that phase.
I mean, some of these countries have a lot of problems of their own. I mean, it's all very well talking about 50,000 troops, but does Nigeria want to allow its troops away from their duties at home?
Well, Nigeria is the big regional power. It's the neighbour of Niger. And there's a new president in Nigeria, Bola Tinubu. He is allergic to putschists. He really is. He was incarcerated by a military dictatorship. And he believes that actually what we're seeing in West Africa at the moment is a struggle between democracy and autocracy. And so he's very focused. My own view is that I'm hoping that diplomacy, good offices, track 2 processes that's more discreet, using other people, for example, the Sultan of Sokoto might prevail, and that there's an off-ramp for the putschists in Niamey. We'll see. But as you've mentioned, it's crunch time at midnight tonight.
And 2 countries won't participate, presumably, in the intervention, the ones that have already had coups, Burkina Faso and Mali, am I right?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. And actually a third has said that they kind of support the putschists too, which is Guinea, because there have been 3 coups. And of course, that again goes back to my point about autocracies versus democracies. The putschists don't want the precedent of an intervention by the regional body removing them, because that would threaten their business model. And so it is high stakes that's developing in the region right at the moment.
Is Russia responsible for what's happened?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, it's responsible in that troll factories and spreading fake news has contributed to definitely even deeper anti-French sentiment, but also anti-Western. And honestly, it's not too difficult to distribute a few flags and have people kind of say, long live, vive Russia. So that's what's been going on. Having said that, it's clear that the junta in Niamey in Niger has sent people to Mali, and they have had some talks with Russians there. So the Russians are always looking for opportunity to kind of move in when the West is in trouble, and Niger was seen as a strong Western ally. And so the Russians are definitely looking for an opportunity.
Why should our viewers outside West Africa care about this struggle between autocracy and democracy in that region?
Well, it's European near abroad, and it's a central Mediterranean route for migrants. So there's a very important highway of informal migrants that go through Niger into Libya and then across the Mediterranean. Some of them may well try and come to the United Kingdom. Also, Niger is the 5th largest producer of uranium in the world. And so European energy supply takes about 1/5 of its uranium from Niger currently. That's important. And then there is a horrible struggle going on against radical Islamists in Niger, both groups allied to Islamic State as well as Al-Qaeda. So that's also important for broader European security, including our own.
Alex Vines, splendidly succinct answers. Speaking personally, I hope for viewers as well, I feel so much better informed. Thank you very much for coming into the studio on a Sunday, what's more. Now, to weed or not to weed? That is the question. For gardeners, the answer was once self-evident, since weeds were the enemy of a carefully cultivated plot. But with a renewed emphasis on rewilding and allowing Britain's native species to flourish, there's a new trend to allow weeds to proliferate and to refrain from lawn mowing altogether. That view was articulated ahead of the Chelsea Flower Show by the BBC Gardeners World presenter Rachel de Tame, who said it was old-fashioned to kill weeds. I sent our producer Matthew Symington, a hardy perennial, to interview the winner of the RHS Gold Medal for Garden Design, Dave Green, who insists that in the culture war and the war against weeds, a balance can be struck.
Traditionally, gardeners have seen the battle against weeds as something of a war of extermination without mercy. So the suggestion that they should surrender parts of their garden over to the enemy might have been a bit of a shock. But today I'm joined by RHS Gold Medal winner Dave Green, and he's here to convince a sceptical public that by balancing native species with more traditional planting, you can achieve something sustainable and beautiful. Dave, we're in this beautiful suburban garden that you designed, and already I've seen a couple of things, ragworts, willow herb, brambles that some gardeners might run a mile from, but you've actually turned them into features. Tell me about that.
Yeah, we're sitting at the back of this large garden, and in this area we've tried to mix together native plants as well as ornamental plants to sort of create a blending of the garden into the sort of natural habitat that's at the back of this area. So we tried to include things like native grass deschampsia, and we've tried to allow things to move in a little bit, like the brambles that you mentioned, and a few willow herbs and some lapsana moving in a little bit. So I think it's really nice to have that mix between the ornamental and the native. And I think it's the diversity of plants that really also bring with it a diversity of wildlife. And so I think that diversity is what we want to encourage in all gardens.
There's a little bit of a debate going on at the moment within gardening. Back at the Chelsea Flower Show, one of the BBC Gardeners World presenters sort of suggested it might be rather passé to weed your garden, but people like Monty Don and Alan Titchmarsh have weighed in this week to advocate for perhaps more traditional gardens. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I think it's nice to have a balance, really, and I think there's a movement now towards letting nature do the work and to try to step back from things a little bit and allow nature to run its course, and that's what I really support. And I think plants want to grow, don't they? And I think we should allow them. And then when new plants move in, you know, it's like adding to your garden for free, isn't it? But I think the humans and people can come in, and our knowledge of how the plants behave and how they grow is what can help the garden to thrive. And so I think if we apply that knowledge, and when we look at things, if we know that they're quite invasive and they're going to take over and dominate, then we can thin those a little bit, and we can make space for some other species where perhaps they're slower growing or they need a bit more support. And I think that's so I think now there's a sort of movement maybe from being gardeners to maybe just being more curators and overseeing the collection and just editing it slightly and trying to have a lighter touch rather than a very heavy-handed touch, taking everything out, trying to allow space for things to move in and develop. And I think that's part of the joy of it, isn't it? Watching it develop, encouraging some plants, limiting others. And it's a balance, isn't it? So that's what I really enjoy about gardening.
From the perspective of a gardener, is it more work or less work to allow some of these native species to grow? Some of them, you know, can be quite overpowering. Does it make it more difficult for the gardener to keep them at bay than it would, for example, to just weed everything?
Well, I think if you just remove everything, it's a kind of, you can do that in a sort of thoughtless way, isn't it? Anything that's small, you just pull it out and completely clear it. It's like apocalypse sort of approach, isn't it, really? Just annihilate everything that's little. But in doing that, you can be removing some really valuable plants, some really nice, you know, delicate flowers. Like we've got Geranium robertianum, which is a native geranium, tiny little pink flowers. It's really beautiful as it sort of scrambles through the other plants. And it will sort of expand and take over areas a little bit, but it's not, you know, it can be pulled out fairly easily. And I think if you can allow these things to develop, then it brings an extra beauty, doesn't it? You know, the delicate little flowers, the way they scramble through other things, I think it can add another layer. And so I think it needs lots of observation And it's the observation that's important rather than the physical work. So I think perhaps with a more ecological approach, there's less physical actually doing, but there's perhaps even an increase or the same amount of observation and watching the garden change and develop.
Do you think we're seeing a sea change right now? At the Chelsea Flower Show, for example, I think it was a third of the show gardens now featured weeds, as we call them, of some kind. Is that going to grow and grow?
Yeah, I think nowadays from customers and other people I know who enjoy gardening, there's much more of an interest in a sort of ecological approach to planting and to gardens. And I think that comes from a sort of interest in the natural environment and the natural world and wanting to see more of a natural palette. So I think we're seeing less kind of unusual, hard to grow plants that perhaps need to be in a conservatory over winter, and more of a move towards plants that are suitable for the soil types, for the aspects, and plants that will kind of maintain themselves a little bit. And I think if you can get that balance right, you can end up with a collection of plants that are suitable for the position they're in and that will sort of maintain themselves. They'll knit together as a community. And I think that's what we're seeing a move towards, that sort of more ecological thinking and a more ecological approach to gardening, I think.
I'm going to ask you a slightly philosophical question now, Dave. What do you think the purpose of a garden is? Is it solely there for human pleasure, or as we're facing more and more warnings about climate change, do you think it's there as a vehicle to sort of enhance nature, to enhance biodiversity? What's your view?
Well, I think there's a lot of studies going on at the moment into the effects of green space, isn't there? And I think there's already some evidence, you know, showing that people's well-being and mental health are improved by being near green spaces. And I think having gardens, there's been studies that show that the diversity of planting in gardens is good for wildlife and good for biodiversity. And it's that mix of plants that people have in their gardens but are not necessarily in nature that brings extra nectar early in the season for insects, you know, more flowering later in the season as well, and extending the season is important for a thriving wildlife, really. So I think gardens have an increasingly important role to play. And I think with the climate changing, people are starting to realise that nature and supporting nature and looking after nature is important. And I think gardens are there on our doorsteps, aren't they? They're something everybody can do. Everyone can be involved in planting trees, planting bushes, planting window boxes. You know, all plants sequester CO2 through photosynthesis. And, you know, I think connecting more closely with nature brings a benefit for everyone, for the planet and for people. And I think it's great to see that there's a bit more of enthusiasm for it, I think.
Well, Dave, if this garden is anything to go by, it's absolutely alive with nature. You've done a wonderful job, and thank you for showing it to us.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad that you've enjoyed it. It's nice to be here, isn't it? I think surrounded by nature and wildlife, and we can hear the bees buzzing. Thanks very much.
Award winner Dave Green in conversation with Matthew Symington. The decision by Arts Council England to slash funding for English National Opera and suggest its relocation out of London prompted anguish from those like me who relished its adventurous productions, its efforts to make opera more accessible, and its commitment to tour the country. This week, the arts body responded to the protest by renewing funding for the company and delaying the planned relocation to 2029. Amongst those dismayed by the initial decision is Nicholas Kenyon, opera critic at The Telegraph, who in the past ran the BBC Proms and was managing director of the Barbican Centre. Nicholas, thank you so much for coming in and joining me today. What do you think happened to bring about the initial decision?
It's a really shocking situation, and for a body like Arts Council England that has a great deal of expertise, you would have expected a better judgment. But I think there was a sudden rush, partly prompted by the now discredited Secretary of State Nadine Dorries, to move funding of the arts out of London into the rest of the country. And that coincided with the Arts Council's funding round last November. But, I mean, it was really unacceptable that at 24 hours' notice, English National Opera was then faced with the prospect, a bit like your last gardening item, you know, pull up a plant with all the roots, with all the groundwork around that, and plonk it somewhere else without any consultation.
I've heard that the suggestion to move to Manchester was sort of pulled literally out of the hat at the end of the meeting. Oh, you might go to Manchester.
Without any consultation there with Andy Burnham or any of the arts bodies in Manchester, or, indeed, with other opera companies like Opera North, who have a great interest in Manchester. So it has all the feelings of a decision taken in haste by people who thought, and there's a very interesting context to this, remember, that as well as English National Opera, the Glyndebourne funding was cut for its tour around the UK, and Welsh National Opera's funding was cut for its presentations in England. So there's definitely not just an out-of-London agenda going on here. There was a attack on opera as a genre.
Yes, I mean, it's so extraordinary that, isn't it, that the companies that were doing the touring were going out of London were being penalised financially. So what is going on in Arts Council England?
Well, I think there is a regime at Arts Council England that, for the very best of reasons, wants the arts to move with the times, wants there to be a more participatory strand in what they do, and to strengthen the arts out of London. And none of us are against that. Those are very, very worthy aims. But don't do it at the cost of penalising the very companies and the very organisations who have created what a wonderfully thriving operatic culture with, you know, great singers, great designers, great directors, great orchestras, great choruses. All those things are what make opera what it is in this country.
But I must speak perhaps on behalf of the many viewers who may well be saying, but why should millions of pounds go to this very elitist art form? You know, the ticket prices are £260 a seat. Well, you know, make them 310.
But to regard it as an elitist art form is fundamentally wrong. If you think where English National Opera comes from, Lillian Baylis, the People's Opera, it has always been in touch with the widest possible audience. Some things are expensive, some things are more expensive than others, and there has to be a balance at a time of a cost of living crisis in how the funding for the arts generally is handed out. But opera gives back an enormous amount, and you know, at the end of the day, what a thrilling experience it is when an opera works really well and singers, directors, opera orchestra and chorus come together.
I do know that thrill very well, and I've experienced it, for example, in New York. And I don't think that the opera in New York does get public subsidy. So one of the highest quality opera houses in the world is operating without public subsidy. Why can't a rich country like Britain be like the United States and leave it to the private sector?
Well, that is a perfectly reasonable question, but I think it's one that we've wrestled with over years and years, and I did so both at the BBC and at the Barbican Centre, where we were dependent on the City of London to underpin our funding. If you think about our institutions, the BBC is a very good example. It is fundamentally a public service institution, and our arts organisations, since the war, have been public service institutions with an underpinning funding to which a gradually increasing private enterprise has been added. But I think that's exactly the other way round from America, where it is private funding that created those things, and then there have been very small amounts, as you rightly say, of public funding added in. I don't think we can change that overnight.
No.
But the opera companies are doing an amazing amount in terms of private funding.
But I suppose you might say that for as long as they are public funded, people like me who go to the opera think, oh, well, we paid our taxes, so, you know, we don't really have to put our hands in our pockets anymore.
I don't think that is a fair way to look at it. Everybody now, in terms of private individuals and private companies, needs to have an incentive. Then it's not going to be just charity. It's going to be what can we get from this relationship. And I think when you look at what ENO has been doing for health, when you look at what it has been doing for community cohesion, remember what a difficult situation it was coming out of the COVID pandemic. There are big issues with children's development, with community development, with personal relationships, and opera brings people together, a huge number of different disciplines working in the same theatre to the same end, and it's an inspiring way of bringing people together.
Nicholas Kenyon, a huge privilege to have you on the programme. You are such a distinguished voice in the world of the arts and music in particular, and good luck with your writing at The Telegraph, which I very much enjoy as well. Thank you so much for coming on GB News today.
Thank you.
And please come back soon. After the break, Stefan Kyriazis will be here to tell us about a unique chance to enter the life of a champion of the world.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant Mercury, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Sotheby's has gathered together a unique collection of items that once belonged to the British rock icon Freddie Mercury. The auction will take place next month, and before then, the collection is displayed at the auction house's galleries in London. And the bohemian Stefan Kuriazis is here to rhapsodise about it.
I am. It's a kind of magic, Michael, let me just say, and it's absolutely stunningly beautiful. It's very much, it's not just a chance for fans to go and gawp and look at things from a famous person or from their idol. This is actually, short of something like Graceland, it's a very rare chance to almost go and see how he lived. It's set up across 12 huge rooms, 1,400 items, and so you've got the grandest of most glorious, glamorous things, but you've also got incredibly personal little touches that give you a little insight into who he was. And this is all from Mary Austin, who lived in the house where Freddie lived, Garden Lodge in West Kensington. She helped him, she found the house, helped him buy it, and she has been living there since 1991, after he died. And she has finally decided to clear it all. And she described the difficulty when she first moved in until she looked around and she realised that the house was romance, beauty, him. And that's what you get when you go to this exhibition. So you have all this, you have his incredible, all his stage costumes, you have his kimonos. He loved Japanese art. He has a very important collection of Japanese art, which collectors are looking forward to buying. All these incredible prints, but there's also lacquerware, and then there are kimonos everywhere that he wore at home. He wore on stage, but he also gifted to friends. So you have, it's always this overlapping with this man.
By the way, he had a very good eye and very good taste. I mean, there's Matisse and Picasso and all sorts of things.
Absolutely. And there's gorgeous little things like Tiffany. I'm hoping for Christmas you're going to get me his Tiffany moustache comb, Michael. I've popped that on the side. But also his incredible table settings. There are all these works of art. There's a £500,000 Tissot knocking around there. But there's also, like, handwritten lyrics for We Are the Champions.
Oh, yeah.
Might cost you 300,000, but they're little scribbled doodles on the backs of notes because he was also an artist himself. There's this hugely grand dinner table, all set up, you can imagine sitting there, but on the side in a glass case there's a book where he kept notes on every menu, but he also noted down what people were wearing, jewellery, gowns, and little comments about that. So it's everything about the man, and it's glorious, and it's free. Everybody. It is free until the 5th of September. Please go. It's unbelievable.
That is extraordinary. Now, Matthew Bourne's Romeo and Juliet. Tell me about the setting. It appears to be in a prison or...
An asylum.
An asylum?
An asylum, yes. So what have they done? They've woked it. They've updated it. What's going on? I horrified all my fellow critics' friends when I confessed I'm not a huge Romeo and Juliet fan. I find the story a little bit frustrating. Insta love, why don't they just communicate, get on with it? So this is a modern setting, an asylum. These kids have all been thrown in there because they don't conform, because they're a little bit different, they don't fit in. And the conflict is not Montague and Capulets, it's the kids against the guards. And some pretty terrible things happen. But also the love story is out of two people in desperate situations that find something in someone to love. I have to talk about Paris Fitzpatrick, who's the lead dancer, one of my favourite dancers in the world. He doesn't dance, he acts. He's exquisitely beautiful when he's on stage, and so you feel everything. And it's not...
Steady on, old chap. Have a glass of water.
But I urge people, if you're worried about, dance isn't for me, ballet isn't for me, this is dance as performance. It's telling a story. So everywhere you look, there's different characters and people doing things.
And it's the music of Prokofiev.
It is. Exactly. The bit we all know, but we go in straight away with that music. It's a remix. So you have shortened versions of the classical music. It gets a bit jazzy in places. When the kids have a party, it gets a little bit grindy and down and dirty, and it becomes a very sensual, sexual thing. It's phenomenal, and it is touring the country until November the 4th. It is going absolutely everywhere. Please, please go and see it. It's wonderful.
I'm so pleased to hear that. A shout for something that's going around the country. Thank you, Stefan. That's it for this hour. I'll be back in just a few minutes with more arts and cultural pieces, plus our ethical debate on whether any crime is so petty that someone should not go to prison. Stay locked in with GB News.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to our latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So after an unsettled start to the weekend, things do look better for the second half of the weekend as Storm Anthony moves away to the east, putting us in this northwesterly airflow. So bringing us some showers today, but also plenty of sunny spells. For many, it will be a dry day. Those showers will be mostly focused down the central spine of the UK, heaviest across Scotland, Northern England and Northern Ireland. We could also see the odd rumble of thunder, though with lighter winds, still brisk down some eastern coasts, feeling more pleasant than it did on Saturday. So as we go through this evening, those showers will continue for a time, but becoming increasingly confined to northern areas, with clear spells developing elsewhere. And with those light winds, that could mean we see the odd patch of mist and fog for some southern and eastern areas. But temperatures will drop a little bit more readily again tonight, so more widely a chilly night, with temperatures in rural areas dropping into single figures. So a fresh, bright start to the new week. We will see a few showers developing again, mostly across the northern half of the UK. Plenty of brightness in the southwest at first, but clouds starting to move into the afternoon as we get the next low pressure system moving in, and once again feeling pleasant in the sunshine.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to. by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. And to begin with an ethical debate. I'm asking whether a prison sentence is effective in deterring crimes like theft. Two former prison officers who have created a charity to rehabilitate ex-offenders will join me. Any visitor to Paris will be familiar with Les Bouquinistes, the open-air booksellers perched on the banks of the River Seine who embody the bohemian spirit of Europe's most romantic city. But they're putting up solid Gallic resistance to plans to relocate them during next year's Paris Olympics. We've sent an unmovable reporter to find out more. Elsewhere on the continent, sailors have found themselves battling not just the wind and the waves, but pods of curious orca whales who recently have been ramming into sailboats. Scientists insist it's a form of play, but as one sailor who's been on the receiving end explains, these orcas play rough. Later in the show, Julian Lloyd-Webber meets guitarist and YouTube sensation Alexandra Whittingham. And I'll be discussing the decision by UNESCO to recommend that Venice be added to its list of endangered heritage sites. I'll be joined by the journalist and campaigner Anna Summers-Cox. All of that to come. But first, the latest news headlines with Rory Smith.
Thank you very much, Michael. Those who have been wrongfully convicted of crimes will no longer have their living costs docked from their compensation payments. New guidance issued by Justice Secretary Alex Chalk comes into immediate effect today. It follows the controversy sparked by the jailing of Andrew Malkinson, who spent 17 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit. He voiced his concerns that expenses may be deducted from his compensation, prompting Downing Street to make urgent amendments. The National Crime Agency is teaming up with social media firms to crack down on posts by people smugglers who are encouraging asylum seekers to cross the Channel. The Prime Minister says the new partnership between law enforcement and tech giants will tackle attempts to lure migrants into paying to make the journey. Group discounts, free spaces for children and offers of false documents are among the posts that Rishi Sunak wants removed to help achieve his promise to stop the boats. Minister for Immigration, Robert Jenrick, told GB News that migrants come to the UK because of a so-called soft-touch approach to immigration.
The overwhelming majority of those people coming on small boats are coming from France, from a safe country with a well-functioning asylum system. They're choosing to come to the UK, and that must be in part because of a perception that the UK is a softer touch. That's why we're changing accommodation. That's why we're making it harder to live and to work illegally in the UK. There's been a 50% rise in the number of raids this year by immigration enforcement to try and close down bogus employers who are breaking the law by employing illegal migrants.
Meanwhile, Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock says a Labour government would still have to house migrants in barges for short periods while tackling the backlog of asylum cases. The Labour government would also continue to place asylum seekers in former military bases for up to 6 months. Kinnock blamed the Conservative government for the current asylum situation, but could not say how long it would take a Labour government to reduce the asylum backlog of 172,000 cases. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is accusing Russia of bombing a blood transfusion centre in the northwest of the country. Mr. Zelensky claims a number of people are dead and others are injured, but the president did not disclose how many fatalities there are. He described the strike in the eastern Kharkiv region as a war crime. There's so far been no comment from Russia. Meanwhile, a university building was in flames in the Donetsk in eastern Ukraine, a region now under Russian control. Local authorities blame the shelling on Ukrainian forces that they claim are now using cluster bombs. The US sent cluster munitions to Ukraine last month, but Kyiv has promised to use them only on Russian forces, not civilian targets. Storm Anthony saw 78-mile-per-hour winds hit some parts of the UK yesterday, blocking 100 miles of railway between Exeter and Penzance. About half a month's worth of rain fell in some areas, with a number of people evacuated from their homes in North Yorkshire due to flooding. Gusts of 78 miles an hour measured at Berryhead in Devon, while 43 millimetres of rain fell in Scarborough in North Yorkshire, almost half of August's average rainfall. Well, despite a bit of rain on the parade, Brighton's Pride celebrations carried on yesterday, but things came to an abrupt end last night when a band was left on stage without sound. The Black Eyed Peas were forced to end their set early when the sound cut out, leaving fans to carry on singing. Yesterday's event was hit by train cancellations and wet and windy weather as Storm Anthony battered parts of the UK. Trains are now back up and running for the day 2 of the event. Well, meanwhile, heavy rain has forced the cancellation of Newcastle's Loose Fest yesterday and today, which had been expected to attract around 60,000 people. And if you've ever wanted to talk to the animals, hunting enthusiasts in the Baltic countries could show you a thing or two. Competitors in Latvia, as well as Lithuania and Estonia, grunted and bellowed in a battle to be named the champion stag caller. They were scored on their ability to imitate the animals in different categories. Like we call him a deer. The winner will compete at the European stag calling competition in Poland. I really should watch these clips before letting you watch them. This is GB News across the UK on TV in your car. It's back to Mike.
Thank you, Rory Smith, for a memorable reading of the news. New guidance from the Ministry of Justice to Britain's police forces has raised fresh fears of a light touch approach to crime. The guidance advises that first-time offenders for crimes such as drug possession, theft and shoplifting should receive a caution rather than being taken to court. At the same time, Government Minister Richard Holden says that prolific shoplifters should face jail. I'm very pleased to be joined by Adam Hawksby, who's Deputy Director of the Onward think tank, as well as Steve Freer and Val Vafrosh, both former prison officers who founded Tempus Novo, a charity to rehabilitate ex-prisoners. Let me start with you, if I may, Adam. What is the argument for saying that those who are committing these fairly minor offences for the first time should face going to prison?
So I think the really important thing you mentioned there is the word prolific. So people that are maybe shoplifting, committing burglary, maybe are involved in antisocial behaviour for the first time, the evidence is pretty clear that for those first-time offenders, or maybe the first 2 or 3 offences, custodial sentences, prison are not the right approach. But there are an increasing number of prolific offenders, those that are committing dozens of crimes, who aren't getting custodial sentences. And so we know that about 10% of convictions, or people that receive convictions, are responsible for over half of crime. Last year, there was data that said that the number of burglaries needed to commit was 27 to get a custodial sentence. So it's those prolific offenders where we should be using prison more regularly to ensure that the population are protected.
And Adam, tell me about the other advantages that would bring, because I mean, obviously you would argue that some people will not get burgled if the burglar is already in jail. And I suppose it would also help police clear-up rates.
It would, and one of the key things that we need to look at is confidence in the police and in the criminal justice system. So there was a report last year that showed that about 40% of people wouldn't bother reporting a crime because they wouldn't think anything would happen. Now, that's a real problem. Of course, that's not just about sentencing. It's also about the swiftness and the certainty of justice. You need to know that something's going to be investigated in the first place. And we shouldn't just be focusing on putting people into prison. It's a very small part of the solution, but it is an important one. And that's why I think the government are looking to address these prolific offenders.
Thank you very much. Now let's turn to Steve and Val, who have both been prison officers. Steve, let's start with you. What kind of general view have you been left with as a result of your professional experiences?
Yeah, hi, Michael. So after 30 years working in some pretty tough prisons, started at Wormwood Scrubs and then did a long time at Leeds Prison. And you see people, the same faces actually, coming in and out over years and decades. It's only when you really look behind why these people are committing crime that you can form what I think is a sensible opinion on how to deal with them. And the vast majority come from extreme poverty. They've had very little education. They're lucky if they know who the parents are. They don't know what love is. Actually, prison's respite for them. You become their family. That's how desperate they are, these people that are committing largely acquisitive crime. So from locking them up and having a view that actually that was the right thing to do, for lots and lots of years, I educated myself and saw a different way. And it is rehabilitation. If you want a long-term solution to reducing crime and less victims, then for me, it has to be the rehabilitative approach. And obviously through Tempus Novo, we add in employment, which gives the people self-worth, respect and income. That gives you the sustainability to rehabilitation.
Let me turn to Val Vavrosh. Very interesting listening to Steve's opinion and experience. But the trouble, I would say, is that it's all very well saying rehabilitation is the way, but as far as I know, there are very few effective rehabilitation programs in existence. And maybe it's a bit hard to expect the public to see low sentences, non-custodial sentences being handed out, wishing for an ideal world in which prisoners could be rehabilitated. Val?
Well, we've been doing exactly the same thing for the 30 years that I worked in prisons, and it's not working. You know, rehabilitation for short sentence prisoners doesn't work in prison at all. It's the wrong approach. Community sentences are a lot more effective. What these people need is a job, like Steve's just mentioned. Because of the records that they've got, the in and out of prison that they've been doing all their life, they cannot get a job full of money until they found and stumbled across Tempus Novo. We've now placed 870 people into work, ex-offenders. And really interestingly, only 33 of those 870 have actually returned to custody within a 2-year period. The national stats are up to 45% reoffend within 12 months, up to 64% reoffend within 2 years. Ours is 4%, which proves beyond any doubt that getting them a job actually works. This is what's needed.
Let me go back to
the UK economy of £18.1 billion, by the way.
Yes, thank you, Steve. Let me go back to Adam Hawksby. Now that you've heard what the guys from Tempus Novo are saying, how do you react to that?
So let me be clear, we should invest massively in rehabilitation programs and community sentences, drug rehabilitation. To be clear, lots of these offenders are often addicted to either illegal drugs or alcohol. We should be investing massively in the services that try and move those people away from crime. And I think that the causes and the drivers that were described are right. A lot of people that receive these sentences are in extreme poverty, but a lot of the communities in which they are committing their offences also experiencing extreme poverty. When we do focus groups around the country, people say the number one thing they want addressed in their area is often shoplifting, antisocial behaviour, burglary. And it cannot be right that if the same person is burgling homes or is robbing a local store 25, 50, 75 times, that they are allowed to continue doing that in the community. prison is absolutely and should be a last resort, and it should be an environment where rehabilitation can occur. But it's not right that custodial sentences are off the table or unavailable for people that are very prolific offenders.
Let me just change the tone a tiny bit and go back to Val Vavrosh and ask, if people are interested in Tempus Novo and what you're doing with this charity, how can they get involved? How can they help?
You can contact us. We've got a website. We get referrals from prison, from probation, from police, from the ET providers, from job centres. Anyone with a conviction all face the same problem. They cannot get a job for love nor money because no one will take them on. What we do, we provide 12 months support for both the ex-offender and the companies that we place them into. Because that we make sure we don't just place them into a job, we keep them in that job. And that's the key to the success of what we do. What the government needs to do is to fund us, basically, to spread our service across the country. We're already in quite a few areas, but we need funding to get us into more areas, to get more of these people into jobs. That's what keeps them out of committing crime.
Maybe that's a topic that the Onward think tank could take up. Very pleased to have had Adam Hawksby from Onward and also Steve Freer and Val Vavrosh. Absolutely fascinating discussion. In a few minutes, this programme will amble along the banks of the River Seine to speak to Paris's famous riparian sellers of antiquarian tomes who are bound for elsewhere to make room for next year's Olympic Games. Book in with me after the break.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, my name is Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So today has been much better weather-wise for many compared to Saturday, and this is because Storm Anthony is finally clearing away to the east. Looking out to the west, there is an area of high pressure that might just bring something a little bit more settled for the south on Monday. But as we look through to the rest of this evening, showers generally easing and becoming more confined to northern areas. Plenty of clear spells elsewhere, and this combined with light winds could bring the odd patch of mist and fog for some southern and eastern areas. But it will also mean that temperatures will drop readily tonight, more widely than what we saw on Saturday night. So rural areas seeing those temperatures drop into single figures. This will make for a fresh but bright start to Monday with plenty of sunshine around. A few showers once again across particularly northern areas, heaviest and most frequent across northeastern parts of Scotland. But after a bright start in the southwest, things starting to cloud over as this next area of cloud and rain moves in from the west, but still feeling pleasant in that sunshine throughout Monday. Now looking to Tuesday, plenty of cloud and rain once again moving erratically eastwards. Quite a lot of low cloud, mist, murk and drizzle for western coasts, but drier and brighter further north. And as we look towards midweek, it does look like things will be warming up with those temperatures getting around to the mid to maybe even high 20s.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
yeah.
And action.
Sergeant Vickery, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Few scenes conjure up the bohemian spirit of Paris more than the open-air booksellers or bouquinistes who line the banks of the River Seine. For centuries, tourists and locals have enjoyed perusing antiquarian tomes, stamps and postcards along several miles of the river. As the French capital prepares to host the Summer Olympics next year, the booksellers have been asked to pack up and move elsewhere in the name of sécurité, a word that could summon up the guillotine for the historically minded. Proving a commitment to liberty, equality and fraternity, the booksellers will storm the Bastille rather than budge. We sent Charlotte Dubinsky to investigate. Her report speaks volumes.
They may not look like much, but these green boxes hide a veritable treasure trove. They're stocked full of second-hand books, old editions of magazines, maps and pictures you can take back home as a unique souvenir. They're a firm fixture here along the Seine, and they are without doubt a symbol of the city's literary culture.
This is Europe's largest open-air book market, and it represents a tradition that goes back hundreds of years. But as Paris is gearing up to host the 2024 Olympic Games, the booksellers here fear that a new dark chapter in their history is about to unfold.
We have learned that we were supposed to move the boxes away. We feel very bad and angry, and we don't understand, and we think that's some sort of idea that someone had in his office, not realizing what it means to remove those boxes that are very heavy, and most of them are old, and we don't understand how they're going to do that with, I think it's like 600 boxes.
Security around the opening of the Games has been cited as the issue. In a letter from the Paris Police Authority, the booksellers were told the removal of their boxes was essential. Hundreds of thousands of spectators are expected to line the river's edges to watch the opening ceremony, where more than 100 boats carrying athletes from across the world are due to float down the Seine, and the police want to clear the area as much as possible. The bouquinists say they're being erased, calling the order by the Paris police an affront to the history and soul of the city. And people in Paris, it seems, agree.
You always see these booklet areas and cards and artists all through this particular street. So if they were removed, that takes part of Paris away, I think.
I believe there's like other thing for security to be done instead of moving them. There's more trouble here in Paris before like annoying these type of people, you know, doing their job. That's part of the culture. I think it's a good thing for the tourists to see the bouquinists here.
I think it's a bit unfair because they've always been there and they make money, people love them, they sell vintage things that you can't find elsewhere in little shops. So I think it's a bit unfair that they are asking them to leave just for the Olympics.
Michel has been working here for several years. He tells me his main concern is over the fragility of many of the boxes.
We have boxes that are very old, first of all, and if we move them, they're going to break. They're going to break for sure. You see right here, you can notice that the wood is rotten, as I said, and it's moved. And when we move the whole scene, it's going to break. We are afraid.
The booksellers have found support in the form of the Paris City Hall. It's offered to pay for the removal and the reinstallation of the boxes, as well as making any repairs needed. But the association which represents the booksellers says that could cost over £1 million. Laurent, like many other booksellers, is refusing to budge.
Removing those boxes away, that's really nonsense for us, so we're going to fight. The security threat comes from the fact of having hundreds of thousands of people here on the side of the Seine, so we don't understand why they're targeting us. I mean, they should protect us, not target us.
It seems this story isn't quite yet finished. Charlotte Dubinsky in Paris for GB News.
Thank you very much, Charlotte Dubinsky. Consider the subtleness of the sea, how its most dreaded creatures glide underwater. So wrote Homan Melville in Moby Dick, the portrayal of an existential battle between a man and a whale. Pods of Orca, so-called killer whales, have been ramming sailboats off the coast of Spain and Portugal. Scientists insist that the activity is mere sport, as skittish orcas train their young to target the rudder and hull of small vessels. Matt Johnston, whose boat was playfully nuzzled, joins me live from Gozo in the Mediterranean. Matt, do you have a whale of a story?
I would say, yeah, we were definitely playfully nuzzled just off the coast of Portugal.
Tell me about it. I mean, seriously, you were pretty frightened, I think.
It's certainly something that you're not expecting. We were sailing down the coast, and it's a very small boat. When suddenly we were hit by something, it felt like we were being T-boned by another car. But obviously we're 2 miles from shore. The crew were all a bit jarred immediately. It's dangerous because boats are hard, so if you get hit by something, you could lose your balance, and that may be initial injury. But we quickly realized what was going on because we were aware that the area was filled with, playful orcas.
How much damage was done to your boat?
All in all, with the insurance, it came to about just over £10,000 worth of damage. Yeah. They bashed the sides, which didn't cause any damage, but was kind of frightening because you're kind of hoping that the fiberglass won't split. But most of it was they were attacking the rudder, and they stripped the rudder completely from the frame that the rudder's on, so that there was really no way we could steer, and we were abandoned out at sea about 2 miles from shore.
How did you get back eventually then?
Well, we put out a mayday first of all, and we got absolutely no response, and apparently that's not uncommon for Portugal. So we ended up phoning the marina that we were heading to and told them our details, gave them our location, and about half an hour later, a police boat came out and drove off the orcas. So, we eventually got towed into sail by a tugboat and into safety.
Matt, do you have an explanation for what's going on? Why are orcas suddenly doing this?
Well, they've been doing this for about 3 years. It's very much in the public consciousness now. My belief is that it is related to overfishing of bluefin tuna, that they're struggling to essentially get enough food to survive. Related to that, though, is if they were really bothered about the fishing, they'd be attacking fishing boats. My theory is that this is playing, as the scientists are saying, but it's play hunting. Just like a cat will teach its kittens to hunt with a mouse or whatever. These larger orcas are teaching the smaller ones to attack these boats, to take off the rudders, because a sailboat is about the same size as some of the larger whale prey, and I think the orcas are retraining to go after whales. Bash them in the sides to make them disoriented, send the smaller ones in to eat at the rudder and immobilize them, and that means then the orcas can feast at will.
That makes perfect sense. As we've been seeing, pictures have been playing while you've been talking, they are absolutely magnificent creatures. I mean, I absolutely love to see them. How do you feel about them now?
Well, I swear in the first few days while I was trying to get things sorted and trying to deal with insurance companies and seeing other boats that had been damaged, because when we were brought in, there were other boats that were completely immobilized and some people with no insurance, that could cover it. Honestly, I did joke about joining the Faroe or the Japanese whaling fleet for a little while, or, because I was just angry, right? They are absolutely magnificent. I mean, there's nothing more. I mean, they're basically big dolphins with nice coloring. When you see them, they are magnificent. It's not so much, it's not as nice whenever they are literally bashing your boat, and then when they glide past and look at you with one eye and you're like, I'm not getting in the water. Oh no, I'm not swimming with these things.
And before any viewers take to Twitter, it was very clear that Matt Johnston was joking at that particular moment. Matt very well survived. In a few minutes, you can hear previously undiscovered guitar music plucked from the 19th century by musician Alexandra Whittingham. Before that, the news headlines with Rory Smith.
Thank you very much, Michael. Those who have been wrongfully convicted of crimes will no longer have their living costs docked from their compensation payments. New guidance issued by Justice Secretary Alex Chalk comes into immediate effect today. It follows the controversy sparked by the jailing of Andrew Malkinson, who spent 17 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit. He voiced his concerns that expenses may be deducted from his compensation, prompting Downing Street to make urgent amendments. The National Crime Agency is teaming up with social media firms to crack down on posts by people smugglers who are encouraging asylum seekers to cross the channel. Group discounts, free spaces for children and offers of false documents are among the posts the Prime Minister wants removed to help achieve his promise to stop the boats. Minister for Immigration, Robert Jenrick, told us here at GB News that migrants come to the UK because of a so-called soft touch approach to immigration. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is accusing Russia of bombing a blood transfusion centre in the northwest of the country. Mr. Zelensky claims a number of people are dead and others are injured, but the president did not disclose how many fatalities there are. He described the strike in the eastern Kharkiv region as a war crime. There's so far been no comment from Russia. Storm Anthony saw 78-mile-per-hour winds hit some parts of the UK yesterday, blocking 100 miles of railway between Exeter and Penzance. About half a month's worth of rain fell in some areas, with a number of people evacuated from their homes in North Yorkshire due to flooding. Gusts of 78 miles an hour were measured at Berry Head in Devon, while 43 millimetres of rain fell in Scarborough in North Yorkshire, almost half of August's average rainfall. That's you up to date, but you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, that is gbnews.com. And Michael will be back right after this short break.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Time for some music. Julian Lloyd-Webber has been interviewing young classical performers who use social media to build huge audiences and successful careers. His latest subject is the guitarist Alexandra Whittingham, who has rediscovered neglected pieces of 19th century music for her new album, My European Journey. Julian met up with her in East London.
Viewers may remember that we interviewed Anna Lapwood, the wonderful young organist who's got an incredible post at Cambridge. And there's a bit of a theme developing here, because today we meet Alexandra Whittingham, wonderful guitarist, young guitarist, who is also has made a great use of social media to forge a trailblazing career. Was that something intentional?
No, not at all. It kind of started in a very, kind of like a very naive way, I would say. I first worked with a videographer who was a customer of my dad's. My dad used to be a window cleaner, and he cleaned the windows of a fantastic photographer who was quite well known in our area, just outside of Manchester.
and his name was Tom. So he asked if I could record or film one of the pieces that I'd recently recorded. And obviously I said yes, and then I don't think I had a YouTube channel at the time, so I made a new YouTube channel, uploaded it, and just forgot about it for the next like 2 or 3 months, I think. And then I think it was my dad that said, "Oh, you've got about 10,000 subscribers on YouTube," and I thought, and I remember texting my friend and going, "Is that a lot? Like, it must be quite easy to get you, because who's subscribing to me? What, what's going on?" And it just kind of grew from there, really.
But you've got over 250,000 now.
Yeah, I honestly don't know how. When anybody says that to me, I'm just like, oh, just don't think about it. It's crazy to me.
Do you keep feeding it? Do you sort of feel you have to make another film and keep it going?
No, weirdly enough, and I know that sounds awful, but I think
it doesn't sound awful. But
I think because
curious.
I think it was because it grew so organically and so unintentionally, as you said. That I think I've never felt that kind of pressure of like, oh, I need to post, because I think my audience, I'm quite lucky, like they completely understand that sort of I post when I can and when I want, and when, because I really enjoy making YouTube videos. I really enjoy just sort of creating things to share online.
How much do you interact with the viewers?
I try to do, so I have a Patreon channel as well, and I try to do live streams on there. I do the occasional Q&A and practice videos and things like that. So I'd like to say, when I've got the time, I'd like to say quite a lot.
Yeah. But that whole social media scene is a really powerful tool, isn't it? Because if you've got 250,000 subscribers, that puts you in a very powerful position, say, with a record company who know that they can sell a certain number of copies just on the back of that.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things that go alongside having a presence online. And I mean, I'm very thankful that I think most of the concerts that I play now, the organizer of those concerts probably found me on YouTube or saw that I had, videos somewhere, or that I'd played somewhere else because of this. And it's led to a lot of opportunities for me.
Because your first album was called My European Journey, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
How is your European journey nowadays?
Good. I mean, like you said, most of my concerts are in Europe, mostly not in the UK, but this year I have had quite a few in the UK. And yeah, the album itself wasn't necessarily based around any of my travels. It was mainly repertoire that I'd really loved sort of growing up. And I was really kind of keen to find some repertoire that wasn't just the Spanish well-known repertoire that that everybody knows and loves for a reason, because it is great and I love that kind of stuff. But I thought I'd love to include a little bit of that on there, and then introduce people, sort of use that as a way to introduce people to sort of lesser known music. So
let's hear one of those pieces.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to play Forgotten by Katharina Pratten, who was a German composer. She actually taught Queen Victoria's daughters how to play the guitar, which I think is quite
Was
quite
she
cool.
forgotten?
Unfortunately, I actually hadn't heard of her until I was doing sort of some research for my album. And I don't know how, because her music, I think, is just so lovely.
It's incredible what's still out there that people haven't discovered.
Definitely. Yeah. So this is a really sweet piece. It's one of my favourites of hers, called Forgotten.
Well, that's really beautiful. Well done for finding it.
Thanks.
Rediscovering it.
Yeah, it's really nice to kind of, I enjoy playing maybe like a set of 3 little miniatures like that in a concert. I think it's nice to kind of break up the program
Yeah,
sometimes.
it's beautiful, beautiful. Great choice.
Thank you.
So you've got a new book just come out?
Yes, I have. It's called European Romance, and it's basically for any guitarist that likes 19th century music and wants to be introduced to new 19th century music, then that's what it is. It's yeah, I'm very lucky that I was approached by a great publishing house called Camden Music, and we've worked together on this book for the last actually couple of years. It's taken a while, and the reason it's taken a while is because it was my bright idea to record a video for each piece in the book, and there are 19 pieces, and I did all of the video recording and editing myself, so that's what took me so long. But for anybody who follows me on YouTube, I will be having sort of a good 20 videos come out.
There's quite a lot of unfamiliar repertoire there, so people will really want to buy them.
Yeah, there's a few. It's similar to the album in the respect that there are a few things that that people will know, alongside things that hopefully people won't. So there are from all around the sort of all around Europe, basically. So we've got Denmark, Italy, France, Germany, England.
And no visa restrictions.
No visa restrictions either. So yeah, that's always a bonus.
So you've specially recorded some pieces for YouTube. Do play us one of those.
Yeah, so I kind of, with my YouTube, I try to, well, it's literally just a collection of pieces that I love to play. So one of those is Tango on Sky by Roland Diens, the late French composer. He's one of my favorites, actually. We recorded the video for this at a bar in the south of France.
Sounds good.
In a little town called Belay, and we got all of our friends around the area to kind of come and sit around this big table while I played, and we're all drinking wine and talking. And
well, we'll recreate the atmosphere with some water today.
Yeah, sure.
That's brilliant. Really love that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That piece apparently was actually improvised when he was at a party in Paris.
Amazing.
So whoever can improvise like
I
that,
wonder who wrote that down then.
I know. But yeah, he's incredible.
Thank you very much. Julian Lloyd-Webber and Alexandra Whittingham. For almost a decade, campaigners have urged UNESCO to list the city of Venice amongst its endangered heritage sites. So far, resistance from the Italian government and political bargaining by the UN body has prevented that, but UNESCO has now stated that it will require the city to be listed. Venice is challenged by rising sea levels. Our very own producer, Sophia Hill, was recently living in the Queen of the Adriatic. Sophia, hello. And you experienced some quite high water while you were there.
Yes, so when I was there, I was studying out there during my year abroad, and I was there for 7 months overall. And in Venice, there's a thing called Acqua Alta, which happens every year during the autumn and winter months. And I'd heard of it, but I didn't think it was any real problem. 2019, Venice suffered from one of their worst ever Acqua Altas since the worst listed one in 1966. And I just remember overnight almost, life, like your normal day-to-day life, was just completely turned upside down. And you'd be walking to university, you'd turn a street, and then suddenly, nope, you can't go down that way because there's 2 feet of water.
What sort of damage is that water doing to the fabric of the city, do you think?
So it's the actual building of the city itself, obviously, is suffering from the damage from the water every year. And shops and businesses and restaurants and cafes, they all are influenced by it every single year. And the costs and the damages that they have to face every year are quite significant. So
the buildings in Venice, what are they built on? Are they built on islands or are they built on stilts or a combination of the two?
I think it's a combination of the two. I know originally they were built out of the marshes and they built up on that back, God knows when, very long time ago. But, I mean, the actual structure of Venice itself, in my opinion, is quite strong, but I think it's the cost every single year now that is getting so much worse.
Are Italians talking about this problem? Have there been government plans to do something about stopping the waters?
Yeah, so there's a system called the Mose system, which is essentially a massive flood barrier, similar to the ones we have on the Thames, but that was delayed in being used. So I think it was pushed back by several years and came into effect a couple of years ago now. But the costs that have gone into that are quite extreme. And then the delay wasn't in time to prevent 2019 from happening. Now it is hopefully working, but I think the government have come under a bit of the attack for that.
It would be a bit of a stigma for Italy, wouldn't it, if one of its prize cities was listed as an endangered heritage site?
Exactly. I think it's potentially just the embarrassment, which is why they're slightly against it. But I think for me personally, it's without doubt that it should happen because it's one of the most beautiful cities in the world, so I'm all for it.
Sophia Hill, thank you very much for jumping in rather at the last moment, I must say. Emily Carver is here, and you're going to be taking over in a minute.
I will. Venice is absolutely beautiful.
Yes.
I remember I went on a choir tour to there, and I sang in some of the beautiful churches. Absolutely stunning. Very hot indeed when I went, and you do get a bit of fragrance going around in August.
You're dressed in a beautiful Adriatic blue.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes, I'm come well prepared for this last story. But we're going to be talking about, well, getting back to politics. You know, traditionally, there's not too much going on at the moment, but there seems to be a slanging match occurring between Suella Braverman and Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition, over, guess what, illegal immigration. So Suella Braverman has accused him of sabotaging her efforts to stop the boat, so we'll dig into that.
Wherever there's a slanging match, Emily Carver will not be far behind. I'd like to thank all my guests this week. It's been a really joyful show for me. I'll be back at the same time next Sunday, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Meanwhile, have a blissful Sunday afternoon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to our latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So after an unsettled start to the weekend, things do look better for the second half of the weekend as Storm Anthony moves away to the east, putting us in this northwesterly airflow. So bringing us some showers today, but also plenty of sunny spells. For many, it will be a dry day. Those showers will be mostly focused down the central spine of the UK, heaviest across Scotland, Northern England and Northern Ireland, where we could also see the odd rumble of thunder. Though with the lighter winds, still brisk down some eastern coasts, feeling more pleasant than it did on Saturday. So as we go through this evening, those showers will continue for a time, but becoming increasingly confined to northern areas, with clear spells developing elsewhere. And with those light winds, that could mean we see the odd patch of mist and fog for some southern and eastern areas. But temperatures will drop a little bit more readily again tonight, so more widely a chilly night, with temperatures in rural areas dropping into single figures. So a fresh, bright start to the new week. We will see a few showers developing again, mostly across the northern half of the UK. Plenty of